My name is Herbert Wilkerson. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I also work as a director of student multicultural and diversity programs here at UAB. And I'll be moderating your panel today. During this time frame, we will do a series of questions to the different panelists, and towards the end, we'll leave time for any question and answering that you may have as an audience. Feel free to put any questions and answer questions in the chat, and we will work on those as well. And so, with that being said, I will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Sunny.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Herbert. My name is Sunny Briscoe. I am the Deputy Director for a nonprofit in Portland, Oregon called the Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon. We provide peer support services to the Tri-County area in Portland. We also do training in that we train the peer workforce through our peer wellness specialist training. And then we also host an annual peer leadership conference called Peer Apocalypse. So we kind of consider ourselves a little bit expert when it comes to peer support. So thank you.
All right. Anyone can go next.
My name is Terry Leckron-Myers. I am one of the Evolve directors for Mental Health Addiction Association of Oregon, working with Sunny Briscoe. And we are part of the organization, has about 30-something programs that deliver peer-delivered services anywhere from every environment, from mental health court to the joint office camp, working in the camps, and as well as Kaiser and OHSU. We have multiple venues that we deliver services to our peers, and we are in Portland, Oregon. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, I'm TJ. I am a peer specialist for the state of Alabama. I'm also a peer specialist trainer. I have been in the peer world now for 4 years. I worked for JBS doing individual peer work and group work. And I just transferred to AltaPoint in Mobile to their crisis diversion center. It's some things that we're trying to get up and going in Alabama with the diversion centers and having peers there. It's going to be fun to learn a new position and stuff, but that's some about me.
All right. Congratulations on your position change. I've worked in community mental health for a long time, and definitely worked in community mental health centers here in Birmingham and in the Anderson-Jacksonville area. And so definitely have had interactions with peer support specialists, especially through JBS. And so you all bring definitely unique area of expertise to the conversation. And will be definitely two great conversations. Sunny, I'm gonna ask you, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself again and say your mic was going in and out. And so if you don't mind introducing yourself again, that'd be great.
No worries. Does that sound better?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm Sunny Briscoe. I'm Deputy Director for the Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon. I work with Terry Leckron-Myers. We provide peer support services in the Tri-County area in Portland, Oregon. And we also do training and technical assistance. And we also run a peer leadership conference annually called Peer Apocalypse.
Got you. Okay. So to get started, Terry, if you don't mind, just explain to the people what a peer support specialist is.
Yes, peer support is a peer recovery practice involving listening, mutual learning, respect, hope. Peer support happens when someone who has been there comes alongside a person to listen and accompany them, and providing connection and context for each person's unique recovery journey. For those who provide authentic peer support, believe in recovery, and work to promote these values. Recovery, we definitely honor the voice and choice of our peers. It is unique to every individual, and it's a journey, not a destination. Focusing on the strengths and allows a person to recognize their potential to make the new choices And it's a self-directed plan. So we use the 8 dimensions of wellness in working with them, and healing and growing are natural, and it just lets us walk side by side with them.
Thank you. And so, TJ, like, why are peer support specialists valuable resources for those managing mental illness and/or addiction?
A lot of times, as a peer, we can reach the peer to where like professionals can't, or we'll think outside of the box. You know, it could be like maybe a woman's living in a group home and one of her chores is cleaning up the bathroom, and she don't want to clean up the bathroom. You know, we would be like, why, or you know, and try to figure out what's going on and stuff. It's something that's actually happened. You know, and you know, the professionals could be trying to get in to talk to the person, but because of issues, they just don't open up. Whereas a peer, we can be like, you know, hey, we've been there, you know, and you know, have more empathy, you know, and can relate to them and be like, hey, you know, I've been there. With me, I have complex PTSD from childhood trauma. Also, I'm trans. I go by he, him, his as my pronouns. But it's, you know, just being open and honest with them and listening to them and, you know, being there for them.
That's, you know, all important. Authenticity is so important when it comes to working with people. Empathy is at the base. Like we need to have empathy. And so, and I've worked in group homes before, and definitely having, you know, I remember even being in group homes and having individuals who have been in a group home longer or kind of knew the ropes a little bit better, being able to communicate with people who are maybe new to the group home situation and to reach in ways that the staff couldn't. So definitely is important. Sonny, do you believe that peer support specialists are underutilized as a mental health resource? And if so, why?
Sure. I do. I believe peer support specialists are definitely underutilized. We were commissioned by the state of Oregon to complete a needs assessment back in 2019. We published it in 2020, and according to that needs assessment, we were grossly understaffed when it came to the peer workforce. And not only that, but we were grossly understaffed when it came to culturally specific or linguistically responsive peer support services. So not only are we short-staffed when it comes to providing peer services in general, but individuals who identify from BIPOC communities or the LGBTQ communities definitely don't have representation when it comes to peer workforce. So that's why we have something called our training center. Right now it's called Optic. And what we do is we have a peer wellness specialist training, and we have tried to diversify that training in creating culturally responsive curriculum. So we have just the general peer wellness specialist training, and then we have the Black and Afrocentric peer wellness specialist training. And we're working with another organization here in Oregon to create a linguistically and culturally specific training for the Latino community, and then also creating one for the LGBTQ community. So it's very important to have diversity represented in the peer workforce, especially when you're trying to reach communities that struggle with just the cultural sensitivity or taboo when it comes to mental health and addiction. So yes, definitely underutilized. And if you can, always advocate for training dollars so you can really expand that workforce.
Absolutely. You know, being able to provide support is one thing, but having somebody that you can connect to is another thing. And so it doesn't diminish those who provide support who may not look like you or you may identify with, but having those who do, it just adds more value and more, and can just provide a service that can penetrate more, definitely. So TJ, what kind of training is required to become a peer support specialist?
Well, in the state of Alabama, we have a week-long training that we do. It's through the Department of Mental Health. There's 2 different times. There's the MI, and then there's the CRSS. The MI is those with just mental illnesses, and the CRSS is those with drug addiction or some kind of addiction. Me, I'm an MI. And so in the training, I mean, it's 5 days long, and we do that. And then after the training, they get certified. And then we do continuing ed quarterly. Like this last one, we did QPNR training through ASPARC, which is a suicide prevention training. So it's important that we do keep up to date with what's going on in the peer world and get the trainings that, we need. It's not, and it's so fun to learn new techniques. And the thing about the techniques that I've learned in the training, because I'm a trainer, I use it on myself. Like we have the 3 C's that we learn, which is catch it, check it, change it. Like if there's a
Yeah.
negative thought, you catch it, you check it, is it true, and then you change it. And that's also with being a leader, is using it for yourself also, and staying up to date.
That's something you speak to that's important when it comes to being a leader and a peer support specialist, is that you still have to manage your own mental health needs. And so, that cognitive behavior approach you just named with the 3 C's, and, if it's therapy that you need to go to, we're doing things to take care of yourself, versions of self-care, because it can be a lot when it comes to being a peer support specialist and managing other people's needs and emotions. Terry, Sunny talked about, the need for increased diverse representation with peer support specialists. And I would like to hear you speak to that, and also what challenges exist for increasing diversity in peer support specialists.
Absolutely. Yes. I was thinking that when Sunny was talking, I was like, she's answering my question. Yay. but the thing is that what I've been in this business for 20 years. And what I know is that when we did a racial equity report through the prison systems, we found that there was all these people of color that were in there. And then when we had them and we were looking at all the people who were being released, they were not being served by people who look like them. And that is one of the things that we found, that it's imperative for us to be able to find a diverse workforce, as well as people who understand it's not just about what you look like on the outside, but it's also the culture and understanding and really intending how to respect each of the cultures. And so if a person is coming out of prison and they're they have Eastern practices, if a person doesn't understand the importance of that, then we're not really, you can be a peer to a certain point and understand what it's like to come out of prison. But if we don't understand the other layers that go with it, it is harder to honor the voice and choice if we're not aware of what that voice and choice is and what the importance is. And then the challenges that exist in increasing diversity is just working at having some of the different cultures trust you and knowing that they understand. I've been working with the Asian community for a long time, and there is a huge trust. I mean, and it's a lot of it is, I have a friend of mine who is Latino Hispanic, and he says the same thing. We're very private, but what happens behind closed doors, we don't air out our laundry. And peer support sometimes can feel like the opposite of what your culture is that you are at the table with. But if we have more people that are understanding that and being able to address the larger picture and how can we serve our community in a more meaningful way. And so the challenge is to have people get trained and be able to feel like this is, not everybody is aware that in order for us to be culturally responsive, that we actually have to step up and be responsive. And I know that in the community that I'm in, a lot of people are like, well, you do you, and then and I need more people who look like me or other people who look like other people. And so it is that. And so I think that when we to what Sunny said, and that is being able to have peer support training and targeting it specifically to the different cultures will actually break down some of those barriers. But it is a process, and it's not like you can turn the light on and it's all better. It is a journey and a process that we continue to need to be aware of and have on our radar and be intentional about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a wonderful answer. And, as you were talking, I've had conversations about cultural competence versus cultural humility. And, one person can never be fully competent in another person's culture. However, cultural humility is understanding that it's an ongoing process, right? And so, because the reality of it is that even as a Black male therapist, and I work with a lot of Black clients, it's, okay, you're not going to have enough, Black therapists to meet the need of all Black clients to culturally match. But so that doesn't remove responsibility from people outside the culture to take responsibility and being culturally humiliative and, seeing it as a growing opportunity under knowing that you can't just learn enough about a person's culture. All right, is important. And how do you involve that in your practice? How do you speak a culturally humiliative language and whatnot? And so I see you unmuted your stuff, Terry. Go ahead.
There's so many cultures within a culture that
Exactly.
I am 100% behind cultural humility. In fact, I was talking to several people about it, and that is that when people started talking about cultural competency, I was thinking, I don't think that that's the right word because it will never touch anything. But cultural humility and just knowing that we don't know, even if you know that I look a certain way, there are some other cultures that look like me, but they are not the same. And we have to understand that.
Yeah. Even as a Black person, it's like, just because, I'm Black and you can be across town and do things totally different based on how your family grew up. But understanding that and being able to have a culturally humiliative approach, it helps you converse with people. So when you talk about, the stigma associated to mental health that may exist in their families or whatnot, it doesn't mean you're saying that your family being or culture being a private people doesn't mean that, it's all wrong. It's just when it comes to certain parts of it, we can have more conversation. But you're meeting a person where they are, you're constantly like, you're letting them be the expert of their own story, which is, so needed. And so, but I can talk about that conversation all day.
Herbert, I just wanted to add, there's some folks that might ask the question, like, how do you become culturally have cultural humility or become culturally responsive? And so one thing I would say is that it is an individual journey to work towards that. You have to do the work on an individual level. But then there's also the organizational level as well. So that the organization that you work for needs to support that work when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion work, and supporting open and honest conversations between people in a respectful and trauma-informed way. So if your organization is not supporting that work, if they're not supporting you having open conversations in the workplace and just being transparent when it comes to conversations, difficult conversations, when it comes to, race, when it comes to, culture, when it comes to beliefs, when it comes to, being part of the LGBTQ community, when it comes to disability, all of those things. If you cannot have honest conversations and transparent conversations, then it will make it that much difficult to actually have those kind of meaningful connections with the peers you're serving. Yeah. So it's both organizational work and individual work.
Exactly. That's one of the things, I was just, doing a presentation before I talked about, the need for, you got to have the bias and unconscious bias training, but it has to be organizational. You have to have policy and procedure in place and routine practices that are addressing the nature of conscious and unconscious bias that exists. You have to assess your own programs. You have to, figure out what the blind spots are. And on the individual level, it's necessary too, but as an organization, if you don't have it, then individuals can kind of run amok and you can't hold them accountable. And so that accountability piece has to be there as well. And so Great conversation. Did you want to add to that, TJ, in any way?
I just totally agree. I mean, sitting back and listen, me being trans, it's kind of different because I've lived as a female for 38 years. I'm 42 now. And I don't know how else to say this, but a lot of times people don't know that I'm trans. So they see me as a white male and they'll say stuff, not knowing that I'm like, and it was just like catch me off guard. But it's like, if they knew that I was trans and stuff, they wouldn't be saying that. And so learning how to, like I said, I've only been transitioning since I was 38 and I'm 42 now. So, and there's still a lot of things that, catch me off guard. But, being in the LGBTQ community is, its own thing, and people don't understand. They'll ask inappropriate questions. It's at inappropriate times. And, if they do find out, and, so it's just trying to educate people, and try to do it in a way of looking at it like they just don't know, because if we don't live it, we don't know, or we haven't, experienced it. 3 years ago, I lost a trans friend who was Black, and he, in the Black community, there's a stigma about going and getting help. And he didn't want to go get help because he would be seen as weak, because, males can't be seen as weak. And, he ended up dying by suicide. So when I talk to anybody that isn't in my culture or in my community, I try to keep that in mind, because, we may not be able to know exactly what it is, but we can still have empathy and not, judge or have a bias. And then when we catch a bias popping up, catch it and, check it and change it, because everybody has some kind of bias going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you're able to allow a person to tell their narrative, ask the why, get information behind it, then that can lead to further conversation. But that's that culture of responsive communication versus like competence and saying, well, I know your culture does this. And it's like,
right.
So, but that is a topic that we can all jump on. I think you can stay on. So moving forward, Sonny, how has peer support specialist training been exclusionary in the past? And what is the Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon currently doing to make peer support training to be inclusive and culturally responsive, which I think you kind of touched on this already, but if you want to add to it, go for it.
Sure. That's a great question. So one thing to look at always is your data, your demographics, and consider the populations that you are serving and consider the ones that you're not. So we did not do that in the past. We our training program has been going on for about 6 years. And we started off with just trying to get at least 2 trainings going on a year. And that was more our concern, was like trying to get it out there. But it was exclusionary in that it didn't consider language, for example, or accessibility. And so we only provided it twice a year, and it was during work hours, and it was only in person. And then, although the pandemic is the pandemic, and we've all had trauma around the pandemic and maybe some loss around the pandemic, the pandemic really pushed people to be innovative and to think differently. And I think the pandemic helped us in the way that it pushed us to take our training and become more accessible. So we moved from just purely an in-person training to now a virtual training. And now we're moving into doing in-person and virtual trainings. And then we're also changing our schedule. And so we're going to have our first hybrid schedule where we're providing, where we're providing evening and weekend hours versus just the 9 to 5 typical workday schedule, which really prohibits a lot of people, especially communities of color, that are working during the day and they're not able to take time off. So we're moving towards an evening and weekend schedule to support people to be able to take that training during off hours, and also keeping it virtual. So that's one way we've tried to improve practices and accessibility. And then the other thing we've touched on is creating a culturally specific and linguistically specific training for 2 populations. But we've also gone ahead and taken our original curriculum and updated it so that we have included cultural responsiveness modules, as well as modules specifically for the LGBTQ community. We brought in culturally specific facilitators to be able to really facilitate those and be able to ask questions in a safe way. We've also encouraged students to ask those questions, but be respectful. And we've also updated our policies and procedures where we take accountability as facilitators. So if we feel that you as a student are not ready to become a peer support specialist, then we will have a responsibility to say no, because not everybody can be a peer support specialist just because you have lived experience. If you're not treating communities well, you shouldn't be one. It wouldn't be right for us to grant you that certificate so you can go and apply for certification. So accountability is a huge thing for us in that we're making sure that our content is culturally responsive, and that we're improving accessibility as much as we can.
Yeah. And that is so important when you think about just what the data is showing. But you have to get people in the studies that, that the populations you're trying to, get to. And you have to have, you got to look at the barriers, accessibility, things of that nature when it comes to transportation, time, how we decrease the dropout rates, things of that nature. So the data can tell the story and can lead to the money. And a lot of, you got to have the data. And for so long, we just did work.
Right. Well, and it's like Terry mentioned before about making sure that you're doing intentional outreach to certain communities, because it doesn't matter. I mean, certain communities don't use social media. They don't like go out and be like, oh, there's this training I saw on social media, I'm gonna go out and do it. A lot of cultures want to be invited, and they want you to come out and go and seek them out and talk to them about what it is and learn more about it before they commit to it. So outreach is also really intentional when it comes to inviting folks to your training. And then a huge thing is always going to be funding. So if your training costs money, that's great. I mean, we're a nonprofit and our training is a source of revenue for us, unrestricted revenue for us, because not everybody wants to pay for the light bill or the rent. It's not, it's not sexy. And so a lot of times, you get organizations who use training or use conferences to generate some extra unrestricted revenue. But you also need to make sure that you're providing scholarships for those who can't afford to attend your training or your conference. And that will improve accessibility, especially for BIPOC communities.
Gotcha. Thank you. TJ. In a study published in Psychological Services, it was found that peer support specialists experience microaggressions related to racism, ableism, misogyny, and transphobia. And all these experiences increase isolation in a way that negatively impacts their ability to do their jobs. In what ways do you protect your mental health and well-being and wellness while also serving to support the mental wellness of others?
Well, a lot of times I have friends that I check in with, and there's self-care and coping skills. Also, being in the peer community, just minorities and everything aside, we do experience burnout because we take it on, and burnout happens very, very fast. Or it can if you don't manage it right. And so managing it, being honest with yourself, keeping yourself in check. Um, and, when people are being transphobic or negative, realize it's a them problem, not a you problem. That's the biggest thing. It could be the way that they were raised or something that they've experienced, but it's a them problem. It's not a me problem. And so I don't take it personally. I do try to educate whenever I can, but in a way that it's not like demeaning or anything like that. But to just try to educate them and let them know. But mainly self-care, coping skills, because I know burnout happens. I've seen a lot of my peer specialist friends have burnout and had to take breaks, or had to go back into the hospital because they relapse, or because it happens. And doing training at Alta Point this week, even nurses and stuff go through burnout. Well, peer specialists, because we do have that extra layer of having a mental illness or something, whatever we may have mental illness wise or anything, burnout can happen quicker. And we just got to know how to manage it and take care of ourselves. And that's where, as a peer leader, it's important that we are role models and we do show that we take care of ourselves. Back in 2019, I was already in the peer world, in the peer leader world, and I had to admit myself into the hospital, because I was going through another suicidal ideation thing that I just couldn't get out of. But it was because I had so much pressure put on me. I was going through a divorce, trying to move, and then taking on other people's stuff. And so, and I had to realize, as a leader, I have to lead by example. What would I tell my peer to do? I've got to do it. And so that's the main thing that I always keep in mind. And I tell other peers too, if you're experiencing it, what would you tell what would you tell your peer to do when you need to do it? Because, that's by leading by example.
Gotcha. And that's good information. I mean, especially speaking to burnout, definitely, stages of burnout and ways that burnout can impact us physically, emotionally.
Well, as at JBS, what I realized, there's boundaries with professionals and peers. Now, peer specialists have a different set of boundaries with peers, because like at JBS, they had 24/7 access to us that they could, if we let them, they would call us in the middle of the night, we could go out and eat with them and stuff, where, counselors or case managers and stuff really can't do that. So we build a different relationship with the peers than what the professionals do. And, and so it's like when me leaving JBS, I still got peers wanting to call me from JBS, and I'm at Alta Point, and I know they don't have that support system. And so it's like, how do I set that boundary with them of, hey, I left, but I got to make sure that you get some, somebody else to be your support. And it's, because we do build a friendship, even though it's still, it's boundaries kind of cross lines a little bit, as far as letting them separate it, because we do get to take them out to eat or talk to them in a different way that professionals don't talk to them.
Yeah. And that, it definitely creates a different dynamic, and the boundaries are easily blurred when you have that situation. Things I talk to people about when it comes to boundaries is that, you have boundaries with your job, naturally, or at least hopefully, but also you have boundaries with, your friends, you have boundaries with your partners, you have boundaries with your, close family relatives and distant ones. And it can just be more difficult to, put certain boundaries in place, especially when, as a peer support person, I imagine that, you already connect with the individual from your own lived experiences. And so, you're being there for them. You don't want them to experience maybe the worst of what you experienced. And to that, I would just say, there's still room for boundaries, trying to find, because a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning it better be a crisis, regardless of who you are in life. And so, but Terry, you got your mic unmuted. Go ahead.
And and I was going to say that it's not just about boundaries, but it's about in peer support. We are also supporting them in getting their own natural supports outside of us. And I have one of our programs is an older adult program, and I had a person who was just going to have coffee with his peer every single day. And so I just wanted to know exactly what value are we bringing to the table, and are we harming a person by having them to be dependent on us for so many hours? And so it is about boundaries. It's about looking at harm on both sides. If we have someone so dependent on us that when we go away, that they are feeling abandoned. And it's also a thing that our job is to provide supports to getting them some natural supports outside of the hours of when we're not around. And that to me is the responsible way of addressing the peer and being able to do it in a way that doesn't harm you or them because you're exhausted by 1 o'clock at night. and at the same time, the peer is supported because they have some other natural supports.
Now, I'll ask this follow-up question because even as a therapist, when I was young in the field and I had a job that had very poor boundaries as a job, it wasn't set up to have boundaries. And so as a young therapist, I, fell into the trap. And once I got around some more seasoned therapists, I was able to kind of figure out how to find, my balance to where I am now, way down the road. How were you able to get to that point of, finding, striking a better balance for you, Terry?
I think that a lot of it happens when we're having supervision with our peers, our peer staff, and it is one of the things that when we talk about the 8 dimensions of wellness, part of the wellness is the physical, the psychological, the spiritual, the emotional. And if we're not our higher selves, then we're not able to be present and listen with intention to our peers. And so I am always watching where, how many hours is a person spending with a person, not to micromanage, but to actually find out what are we doing to help them become sustainable at the end. And then at the same time, having them have it on their schedule allows them to plan out what time and when are they going to get their self-care, as well as knowing that and having peace of mind, because a lot of it is that they don't have peace of mind. Our staff do not feel like they have a peace of mind that their person is going to be out there safe, especially if they're houseless. So how do we quiet that peace of mind in here so that our staff can go home and feel like they can be at peace, that they've done the very best that they could? And so a lot of it is doing the intentional work of finding out what does that peer that you're working with really want supports with, because we can't support them in every part of their lives. And I think that it is, when we're talking about the ethical boundaries, we're talking about, how do we find balance within ourselves as well as them. It is, and I liked what Amanda said, healthy autonomy. That's a great word.
I like that, yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you meant to mute yourself or not, but.
I was done.
Okay. It was like a mic drop moment. I was like. Well, Terry, the next question is actually for you, so you can keep the ball rolling. So how can mental health professionals such as licensed professional counselors, licensed clinical social workers, family and marriage therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, all the people, how can they better partner with peer support specialists?
That's a really good question. When we first started doing, or when I first started doing peer support, we were in situations that were professional environments like hospitals and having contracts with counselors. And as we have progressed over time, it was about making sure that as peer support specialists, we knew what our part was, and really being clear that, and we also have contracts with parole and probation, and being very clear that this is our mission, vision, and values. And when they cross over, like if parole and probation is saying, well, we want you to tell us when someone has been using, well, that's not going to happen. But we do say it in a way that allows everybody to, one of the things that I absolutely love about our organization and our executive director is I have been in meetings with her when she says kindly and firmly, this may not be the best, we might not be the best provider for this contract if you're asking us to do UAs. Because there's no time at any point that we will ever have any kind of power over or have a situation where it feels like a person can't tell you the truth because they fear that you may disclose something to their provider. And so, and then at the same time, the provider, especially a mental health professional, when there is a situation where someone is, are you not going to tell me if someone is suicidal? And so being able to have that conversation that says, if I have a peer that has suicidal ideation, and I know that as a peer, I am not the professional that is able to actually address that. So I will give them the information that your mental health provider is going to be the best person to support you where you need. And because you're telling me that these are your indicators and I just want to support you. So I'm going to give you some options and choices about what you would like. What are the things that you would need some supports with? Do you want me to go with you to the provider? Do you want, being able to kind of discuss the options and opportunities for the person to not feel the way they feel anymore, and letting them know that I am not a mental health provider and that I do not know how to do the medications, but I support you because I have been in situations where I have felt the same way that you have, but these are the things that I have done, and as scary as it is, I had to make that first appointment. I had to have someone go with me. I had to have someone walk through the paperwork because that's daunting because there's all these questions. And so as a peer support specialist, I'm able to walk them through the scariest part. And then at the same time, making sure that they know that if this isn't what they want to do, then I'm going to talk about what kind of safety plan do you want to create right now. Mm-hmm. And then being able to have the person know that there are other licensed professionals that really can hone in on some of the tools that may be more clinical and may need medication. So, and I've had medication. There's times where I've had to have that. And so letting them know that this is just kind of part of, if I want to get better, I need to be able to do some of the things that are provided in our community and kind of letting them know how it works. And we have, and then talking about side by side, we have a new contract working in an area of Old Town where there's a lot of trauma in that area. And we are working with 3 different nonprofits, and our peers are in each of the nonprofits, and we have a QMHP that sits with us. And we know that the QMHP is not the end all be all to all things, but we work collaboratively. And we talk about what are some of the, and we all have a relationship with the person. And so we're working in, okay, so I'll step in if this is what you want me to do, and this is where we're gonna, what kind of supports. So the professional will say, let's see whether we can get them assessed at this one organization. Our peer will drive them to that assessment and sit with them as they fill out the paperwork, or help them fill out the paperwork if that's what they are asking. And then that way the provider is feeling like they're getting support, our peers are getting support, and then when we hand it off, then the provider is taking over and being able to work with the peer So I don't know whether that answers all the questions, but
That
that's
answers
what I,
all the questions. You got a lot of good responses in the chat too. And so, thank you. That was great. That was great. So before we get to the last question, I want to encourage people to, use the chat as a way to ask questions that we can answer towards the end. And for the last question, I'm gonna go to Sunny. In his first State of the Union, President Joe Biden announced a strategy to address the national mental health crisis as a part of the bipartisan unity agenda. A component of the strategy included a commitment to build a national certification program for peer specialists. What are your thoughts on the announcement, and what are your hopes for the future of peer support specialists?
Well, that's a very complex question. So a national certification for peer support, there is one right now. There's actually the Mental Health America national certifications. They have a national certification program. Some of the barriers that prohibit, I think, people from getting nationally certified is the cost. There's a cost associated with certifying through that credential. And there's also a really big time commitment. You have to have so many hours of what they call like internship hours to complete the certification. So that's also a barrier. I think a national certification is a little difficult to do because people talk about peer core values and adhering to the peer core values of peer support. Well, there's a few different versions of the peer core values. So which one are we going to follow? And so having consensus among 50 states is really difficult. And then we have different definitions of what certain boundaries are. State to state has different criteria. And so it's also difficult to kind of get that consensus when it comes to the criteria of becoming a peer support specialist. So with the state of Oregon, you don't have to have hours of internship hours to become a peer support specialist. You have to complete the training, but you don't have to have those internship hours. And there's no cost to becoming a peer support specialist except for the time that it takes to complete the training. So it really reduces those barriers of getting trained and certified. But then the national one, it's like there's cost, there's a time commitment even before you become certified. But then on top of all that, what agency is going to be leading that certification program? So, there's SAMHSA, but then SAMHSA, we all have had experiences with SAMHSA. It's just a lot of questions out there about how you would get consensus with so many different states. And then once you bring politicians into things, it goes out the window even further. That's my opinion. I know that's a little bit of radical thinking than others. I do think it'd be great to have something that you can certify on a national level. Our training is nationally certified, so we are approved through Mental Health America National and through NADAC. But not everybody can do that. Not everybody can meet those needs and standards set by those certifying bodies. So that's why a lot of states have already taken it upon themselves to create their own certifications through each state. But then that becomes difficult when you, for example, when you're in Portland and you've got Washington right across the bridge in Vancouver. So you can technically provide services right across that bridge. It's driving distance away. But then Oregon certification process and Washington certification process are two different ones. So if there is maybe some kind of national consensus to grandfather in or create some kind of grandfathering process so that you are allowed to provide peer support services no matter what state you're in, I think that would be more functional than creating this whole certifying body and who's going to track that and who's going to pay for it and all of that stuff. So there's just some technical logistical things that are very involved in creating that certification body.
And and that's a good point when it comes to being so close to the next state, but then that next state having something totally different from what you're doing. And it's the same, having my LPC where I can practice from state to state when it's like but that shouldn't be the case. Like mental health is not necessarily different from here to Nevada or whatever state you come up with. But certain states have very strenuous rules when it comes to like getting licensure in that state. And so if you didn't get it in that state originally. So to me, that just creates more barriers and whatnot, especially now with the ability for virtual connections. You have access to more people with specialized training. However, if you can't practice in that state, then that's a limit, even though you have the ability to connect to them virtually. So, you know, I can see where that can be an issue in different areas, along with peer support. And, you know, but at the same time, you get the government involved in politics, and that just brings on its own bag of worms that we are all familiar with. So,
right, it does bring on a level of exclusion whenever you have so many barriers that you have to jump over to get certified. So that's the problem.
Yeah. Somebody in the pandemic said the pandemic created a conversation to allow certified professionals to practice across state lines. I hope the drawbridge truly lets down for full access. Absolutely. I mean, we had that conversations in counseling circles, and there has been some changes as far as like states who are more willing to, you know, let people practice across state lines. And, you know, it's something that needs to change, definitely. Well, this has been great. If you want to throw some questions in the chat, feel free to right now. As people are doing that, I would like to ask each panelist to give a final thought regarding the power of the peer support specialist. And y'all can go in any order you choose to.
So I'm going to just give you an example, and then you'll feel the power. So we have a contract working in the camps, in the houseless camps, and there was a person who was standing there and kind of being big and in presence, and he had a machete, and he was holding it, and our peer support specialist was talking to him about what his experience was being houseless. And he talked to him about how he had a year of recovery, and that his personal experiences is that it changed his life when he was able to go into detox. And from that point, it was like there was this pathway. And so in 45 minutes of our peer sharing his story, that person put down his little machete and said, okay, so how do I get into detox? And so I have, and we have had some very extreme cases of interactions with some people. And then we've also had some interactions that were through treatment modalities and court. And what we found is that there is nothing more powerful than one person who has had that lived experience share their own experience, and the magic happens because the person had been spoken to by a housing advocate. They had been spoken to by other organizations. And it was amazing to see how in 45 minutes there was a transformation. Now, where did that person go after detox? I don't know, but it's a process, because even if that person gets out of detox and goes back to where he's coming from, our peer who he will recognize will be able to be coming back and continue that relationship and know that there's no judgment on what happened last time. That's what happened last time. It's like there is the power of now. There's nothing more present than what we have right now. We've never been here before. So that's the power of peer support.
Good. Sonny, going to get you to go next, but I do have a question from the chat as well that I think you can answer. Has Oregon been able to provide tablets or phones to people who don't have them so they can access virtual peer support? If so, how did you fund it?
And so there is no statewide program that releases tablets or phones. As far as I know, Terry might know differently. But what I would suggest doing is, if you want to maintain connection with the peers that you're serving in the community, write it in your budget. So your budget, you can negotiate your budgets with whoever you're working with, the county, the state, feds, your city, your other community partners that you may have partnerships with, and ask for dollars to support what we call kind of peer needs or service recipient funds. And so you can add those dollars to your budget and then be able to budget for those tablets or those phones. And so what we do a lot of the time is actually use TrackPhone or similar service and get those smartphones that have a data package tied to them, so that you can keep connected to your peer support specialists, and whether it's through Zoom or Google Meets, things like that. So just advocate always with your budgets to include dollars for service recipient needs, especially with like phones, because phones are always really good, especially smartphones, because it's the phone, the text, and the virtual element that really supports those peers.
All right, and any final thoughts?
Final thoughts when it comes to the power of peer support. I myself am the only person in our organization of 80-something folks that does not identify as a peer. I don't have lived experience of mental health or addiction, but I identify as a mother of a child who does. And so with power peer support, I have learned a lot in my tenure here at MHAO, and that advocacy and voice and choice are very important. So I've been able to take those lessons that I've learned from my peers and implement it as a mother of a child, a very young child, he's 6 years old, who is receiving services, and making sure that I'm making the best choices as a mother for my child. But I've also seen the change in the folks that we serve, and really giving back that power of choice. I think a lot of times when you are experiencing mental health or addiction challenges, you feel helpless, and that the power of peer support is being able to give that autonomy, as someone said before, and that their choices back, so that they have that control in their life and are able to make those choices and have sustained recovery. I think because of you giving them their choices back, that they feel like they can be, self-sufficient and empowered to do the choices or make those choices for themselves.
Gotcha. Thank you. And TJ.
I know Terry said that when she was, went through the process, she had somebody there with her to walk her through it. I didn't have that, and so me being able to help a peer walk through the processes and stuff, where I didn't have it, is very helpful to me. And also helping the peer see that they're capable and that there's hope that they can recover. But not only that, but to advocate to the professionals that put peers down, saying that they can't get better, that they can't do this, they can't do that because they're peers. There's the stigmas that we have to fight against. And, for us to be able to go to the professionals and be like, hey, look at me, I've done it, I've been there. And I know if I can do it, they can too. It puts a different light on having a mental illness, because there's so many different stigmas about having a mental illness. Some of them think that if you've got a mental illness, you've got an IQ issue, or, just different things. And, also letting the peer know that they have a voice. There's so many times that peers are afraid that they're going to be labeled as non-compliant or, be judged or anything like that. So, letting them know that they do have the power to say, hey, the medications aren't working right, and knowing that the judge ain't going to mark them as non-compliant for, trying to get their meds changed or anything. People are, those are real fears. I do trainings. I do QPNR training and APPR, which is like the route plan. And so facilitating and stuff, and working with peers. I've seen where one peer couldn't even stay awake. And, whenever I pulled him to the side, I'm like, man, what's going on? He was like, my meds, I can't stay awake. I can't function. And I was like, well, have you not told your doctor? Well, I'm too afraid to, because then they'll mark me as non-compliant. And so, but giving them that voice, that's the power. And also, like I said, trying to change other people's outlooks with people with mental illness too. I mean, because some people just, they've got this going on and they're not going to get no better. I've heard that a lot. And I've seen people get better. So it's just, to me, that's the power. Yeah.
And definitely better works on the spectrum. I've worked in some environments, in residential environments, especially where it's like, well, these kids can't get better. And it's like, well, how do we define better? And what's the baseline and how are we assessing that over time and seeing it individually versus like looking for this collective, whatever better means. Like better doesn't necessarily mean you're off medication, because you can be on medication and do better. It's the thing, like, it's, but that's even the stigma within the field.
One of my peers, when I first met him, he wore a hoodie and was depressed, wouldn't get out of bed, hardly would eat. And, me talking to him and realizing, man, he needs a haircut. He needs, to go to church and stuff, because he is in the, residential, thing. And so we found him a way to get to church, got his haircut, total different guy. Like he's out of hoodies, he's doing stuff, and it's just because nobody would talk to him, give him support, and be like, hey, you can be doing other things other than just sitting here, and so it's just one of those things, just giving people hope, and like I said, changing even professionals' outlook on the way they look at things.
And that's a great way to end it. When it comes to the power of peer support and support in general, even as a therapist, like I have to be aware of a person needs to be met first. We can talk about all the clinical skills I have, but if you're hungry, let's figure out how to get you fed, and then you can hear it on a full stomach, kind of thing. And so, getting a person a haircut, getting them to resources that can meet basic living needs, that to make you feel just better on a day-to-day basis is so important. And the power of the peer support specialist is so, needed in that area and in the other areas. And so thank you all to each of the panelists. This is a great conversation. I have a lot of, years of experience in community mental health, and have never had a conversation like this with, just a team or a panel full of peer support specialists, or people connected to peer support specialists like this. And so very good, very needed, a lot of good responses in the chat. And so to each one on the call, if you, like I said before, if you were receiving continual education for this session, please complete the survey session link posted in the chat box. And now we'll get back to the summit host. Thank you.